Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of EdTech.
Hey, Kara.
How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Who are we talking to?
I'm excited that we're going to be talking to Matt Gerberick today.
Matt's great. Matt always has the best ideas, and he's always got something new for us, and I love that.
Agreed. And I'm excited that he's going to be joining our team.
I'm really excited about that. I can't wait. I feel like Matt's always kind of been part of the team in maybe an auxiliary way, and now it's going to be great to have him full time.
Agreed. I can't wait to talk to him. All right. Well, I'm just going to jump right in and I'm just going to ask you, Matt, to tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in the EdTech world.
So I started several years ago. I won't date myself with when I started teaching, but I spent the first 10 years of my career as a physical education teacher and a coach, and then got into administration, assistant principal and the principalship. And especially during my principal time, but even in my early teaching time, I really started to see the value, the effectiveness, and the efficiencies that can be leveraged by using educational technology with students, and as administrator, not just with students, but with staff and with the community. And so that really became part of my passion of what I wanted to do in education. I spent a little bit of time at home with my son after he was born as a stay-at-home dad, and went back to Wright State and got a master's in instructional design and online learning. And since then, I've been working as an instructional designer and an EdTech coach, both at Wright Pat Air Force Base, and then most recently I was at Clark County ESC, and obviously now with you guys down here at SOITA.
So let me ask you a question, Matt. What would you say? I know that a lot of our like specials teachers, so Kara and you and I, we've all been specials, right? The specials teachers. What would you say to them, or do you have any advice to those specials teachers who maybe are struggling to incorporate technology, especially PE, I think can be a special case, trying to incorporate some educational technology into their instruction?
Obviously, the specials is a pretty broad range. Here's the performance arts.
Sure.
There's music. I guess foreign languages would also be considered a special. And as you mentioned, PE and health. But I really think that there's no shortage of tools and there's no shortage of ways that those courses can be utilizing educational technology. I know one of the schools that I work with purchased heart rate monitors for their students. They weren't Apple Watches, but they were a very fine type of a device that the kids would wear over an extended period of time, and to track heart rate and track activity and things like that. So, you look around and you walk down the street or you're at the mall, the number of people who have integrated technology into their lives in health, digital media for the arts. Now, there's certainly a place for the canvas and the brush, of course, but I think there's plenty of ways that educational technology is impactful in those special areas. And, as special area teachers, anytime you can also work with the core area teachers and doing some cross-curricular things, there's another fantastic way, not just educationally, but through pedagogy, to include yourself with educational technology.
Yeah, that's good insight with special area teachers, just because they're always left on the back burner.
I never understand that, because as a special area teacher, and we're the ones that see all the kids, in some cases, see all the kids all year long, or at least all the kids half of the year. So in some ways, I feel like the special area teachers are actually the core of what's really happening in the building, and those relationships that happen outside of the traditional classroom are really special.
I like how you brought up the fact that some of that technology integration, especially the heart rate monitors, that just got me thinking about data and the opportunity to cross over into those core curricular areas and partner. I know in the library, that was always something I strived to do and sometimes struggled to do, was find a way to work with the teachers and support the teachers, the classroom teachers as opposed to specials. Right. To just enhance and help and do whatever we could. I know so many specials teachers would love the opportunity to do that, to kind of work with the classroom teachers and support them. So maybe there are some avenues where technology can kind of help bridge the gap there and make those connections.
Yeah, and that's organizational, and it does have to come from some leadership also to do those things. You'd mentioned the library, and I'll mention one of the ways that I guess I was using it without really thinking about using it for the sake of using technology was as a junior high
Right.
PE teacher, one of the lifetime activity units we did was fishing. And we would actually take the kids to an area lake or a pond and go fishing for about a week during the class period. Well, prior to going out there, we had to do obviously wanted to learn about not just how to cast, but about where to cast and some science involved with it. So I found these CD-ROMs of this fishing game now this is back in CD-ROM time. So I promised myself I wouldn't date myself, but I just did.
That's okay. We already dated ourselves with the floppy
Okay.
disks.
All right, good.
In previous episodes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay.
So I scooped up 30 copies of this thing, and we would go to the library and they would play the fishing game. And then there were some activities associated with that, like where did you catch the most fish? Where were this type of fish in terms of habitat? So casting into an area with some grass or casting near a log and things like that. So, I didn't start off thinking I have to use some technology. How can I do it? It was more, this is a way to help these kids learn how to do this. Oh, and by the way, it's technology.
Right.
Which makes it more meaningful, I feel like, because it happened organically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We weren't looking for an excuse to use technology.
Right. And, versus, I'm sure there was probably a worksheet I could have found that would have told them where to do this. But the fact that this was kind of gamified it and it was, a digital kind of a learning tool was I think much more engaging for the kids than just something I ran off at the copier.
For sure.
Yeah, which on that, I guess, topic of just technology in general, and this kind of moving into post-pandemic times, what do you think that are the tech struggles that have been around since you started using technology that either still exists now or are still, I guess, present in how technology integration occurs?
Well, the first thing is access. And, I think that the pandemic really turned over a stone. We all knew what was under it, but we could get by because the kids were in person to not address it the way it needed to be addressed. And so the access, meaning connectivity, access to the devices and so forth, that a lot of schools were in a good place for, but there were too many that weren't. So I think that that's still something that we're addressing. And I know that there's been legislation here recently that's addressing broadband and so forth. So those are big things. And then money is provided to schools for some of the hardware purchases. But the other thing is always going to come back to training and time. The typical PD where we hand you this and whether it's a vendor or somebody in the building shows you how to use it for an hour the first week of school or before the school year starts. And then it's okay, you got it, right? And then that's it. So I think that one of the other things that has been addressed and I think will continue to be as a result is the ongoing and the embedded type of professional development and coaching that is really essential in making this effective and useful and not just something that's available but can sometimes be frustrating because people don't have the time to learn it.
Yeah. And how do you think you get buy-in for that kind of stuff, like with districts? And, if you have like one or two teachers that find that kind of stuff important or they really are eager to use it, but they aren't finding the resources, how does that change become impactful, I guess?
Right. So it does have some, ideally it would come from leadership and from some interest, but as you mentioned the term organically before, it has to come from the opposite way. I think about there's a video out, and I don't remember the video or the title of it now, but it's the guy on the hill dancing at this concert, and he's just flailing around, and people are looking at him like, "What's he doing?" And then that's the early adopter, like that's the early adopter, right. And then there's like 2 or 3 more people come over. And people go, what, that looks kind of interesting. And once enough people have decided that that's not weird, but it's actually, oh, I see. Now that looks like fun, or that would be effective. Then that's when you've kind of reached that tipping point to where it becomes not just accepted, but it becomes of interest. And so I think and it's different everywhere and it's different for every person. But I think every building has early adopters. They have people who are already doing these things. And sometimes it's a matter of just them being able to having the time and the opportunity to share with their colleagues what they're doing. Because a lot of times the best PD comes from down the hall, but there's never time for that. Mm-hmm. And so having those conversations and having there be time for those is really important at the building level and at the district level to try and really ignite some of these passions or these ideas and get people on board to want to move in that direction.
Yeah, and once you get teachers to bite,
Mm-hmm. Are you using the fishing
and it
analogy?
kind of trickles. Yes, I am. We're gonna go back.
I'm gonna run with
We're
it.
gonna
All
cast
right,
it
cast
out.
it out. You got a
And
good
then
lure
we're
on
gonna
there.
reel them in. We're gonna reel them
Uh-huh.
in with how
Yep.
cool this is. And then how do we go from, our students, this whole idea of they're just consuming the technology, to changing that importance to making them the creators of the technology?
That's a really important part of all this, is that change. And it's not just a technology thing. That creator versus consumption
Right.
thing can happen in an analog. That's not, we could do this in the woods. I can hand you a map, or I can say, make a map. Who are you going to pay more attention to? If you have to get from point A to B, if I give you the map, yeah, it makes it easier. You looked and you walked and you went where you're supposed to go. But if I say, once you've found it, make a map, well, you're going to be a lot more in tune, or you're going to be a lot more engaged in your surroundings and the process and so forth. So but the creation versus consumption thing is a huge thing that technology does allow for, if we allow it to happen. And that's, like I said, it's not just about technology. It's about pedagogy. It's about control. And it's about that shift
Right.
of letting the kids, giving the kids some ownership. And I know that that's kind of a buzzwordy thing, but it's true. If you're invested in what you're learning about, and it involves things that you're interested in, whether you're 8 or 48 years old, you're going to be more interested. You're going to do it. You're going to be more involved in. It's going to mean
Absolutely.
more to you.
And none of this is new, right? I mean, ownership and publication and all of that's been around and embedded in the standards forever. And I think that can be, I guess, a little overwhelming to teachers to think about jumping from not using technology to creating student created content. And I think it goes back to the training and the support
Totally.
and everything being there. So when you're looking at things like project-based learning, PBL, and all of that, it's all scaffolded. It's all about building. So if you're a teacher that's never done anything like this before, and you're looking at this as something overwhelming, we always, say, don't feel like you have to do it all, and you don't have to do it all at once. If you're using technology for the sake of using technology, we don't want you to feel like we're judging you for that. We just want you to feel like, okay, you've integrated some technology. Now we're ready to take that next step. How can we go from using technology for the sake of using it to using it in a way that's meaningful? Kind of building on that. I think it goes back to what is the SAMR model?
Right.
Yeah, where you're going at using it at a basic level and building on your technology use and the purpose of your technology to the point where students are creating and then reflecting, and making it this whole experience. We'll link some resources for that SAMR model and the universal design and all of that in the show notes for this episode, so we can link some resources there.
No, you're right. I think sometimes it's a change, and that's tough. And
right.
Let's face it. I mean, there's in the last year and a half, there's been so many forced upon changes that it's natural that we're going to gravitate towards some things that we know, or some things that we've done, regardless of how effective or ineffective. They're kind of a safe place, and that's understandable.
Right.
So, as you mentioned, getting people to just try things if they haven't, and I go back again to leadership, and having been in that role, where they've got to know that it's okay for them to try things and it fail, because they're worried about the test, and worried about parents, and worried about being judged and data. And yeah, exactly. And it's like, we're not going to worry about that stuff. We're not teaching subjects. We're not teaching content. We're teaching people. And as people, there are going to be trials and errors. And if you're going into this with good intentions, we're going to have successes, but we're going to have some flops. And knowing that that's okay is important.
Right. Failure is so important. It's so important to model that. And I think as educators, not all of us, because I don't want to, we're not talking like in a vacuum here, but some of us are afraid to fail in front of our students. We've got that idea that we're the sage on the stage, like we are all knowing, and we're not all knowing. It's okay to fail and model that failure. So many of our kids are terrified of failure. We live in this society where this we'll go to the social media aspect of it, where we only see the best parts of people's lives. We only see people's successes, right? I think showing some failure and some struggle is good. It's good for the kids to see that. It's good for them to see adults failing and being able to pivot. We talk about kids having resiliency and rigor, and they're not going to have that resiliency if they don't learn how to grow from failure. And all of these skills that we're talking about kids needing, like we're talking about the coding and we're talking about project-based learning, all of that relies on the ability to fail and grow.
Yeah. And on that same note, I think it's important too that your kids know that you're okay saying that you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's look it up. Let's find out.
Like let's find out together. Or maybe you have a kid that knows and you're willing to learn from them.
Let them teach. That's going to just deepen their own learning and their own understanding of the content.
If we're learning it together, then obviously there's a greater chance that you're going to learn about each other in that process versus being as we said, the all-knowing and the source of all the knowledge, and them being the consumers. So yeah, those are all really important parts to it.
Well, and I'm going to stay kind of on the same track, but I guess in my head, I'm hearing all of these like, well, I'd really like to do that, but the group I have this year is a little out of sorts. What do you think a good stepping stone would be if you want to dip your toe in to more initiative? What's your advice?
I'm not a huge fan of those kids kind of thinking. Those kids are the ones that learn because of you. Sometimes the kids at the other end, personally, this is just a me thing, is some of them learned in spite of me. So I really like to focus on those kids. And, if they're a struggle, well, maybe they're the kids ideally that you would do something different with. Maybe doing the things that you're doing or that have been done with them, to what end does that contribute to their squirreliness, we'll call it, or whatever that happens to be. So, yeah, I mean, and beyond not a fan of that labeling of these kids are this and those kids are this, but I understand it. But I think that's kind of an excuse, that using these tools and using some different methods is what we ought to be doing. So, if you've got some kids who are struggling with behaviors, are the behaviors a result of, it could be a variety of things. And it quite frankly could be nothing to do with school, but then that doesn't make any change as to whether you should try these things or stick with what's been done and doesn't sound like it's been very effective, if that's the perception. I had a kid when I was an assistant principal, and this is several years ago now, right? And he had been, I tell the story a lot, he'd been sent to the office again, and I forget what it was at this point. It wasn't anything major. I don't know if it was homework. I don't know if it was didn't have his supplies or what it was. So I said, Timmy, just have a seat, buddy. I said, well, I'll get with you in a minute. I was finished what I was doing. He was sitting in my office, and he said, hey, Mr. Gerberick, I'm running iOS on my Android phone. I looked up. I said, you're doing what? He goes, yeah, I was able to do something with the firmware, and I was able to make this phone run iOS, Apple's operating system for the iPhone and iPad. I'm like, wow. Like, how is this kid failing? Where's the breakdown in the relationship with this kid? And it may be his fault. I'm not saying that it was a lack of effort or anything on the teacher's part, and this kind of tails back in the very beginning of this, when you said, what got me interested in this? Not about putting iOS on an Android or vice versa, but about those kids that this can bring in or can engage. And, I never forgot about that kid. And it's like, there was a kid who was one of those, he's kind of difficult. Well, but look at the potential that he found on his own, because we didn't provide it to him. And when I say we, I don't mean just the teacher at all. We as in me as in we as in the school or the system.
You never know who you're going to reach with
And it's,
something.
it's a difficult job also because there's very little instant gratitude like there are in some other things, where you've developed something and it sells, or you develop something and it's popular. The gratitude comes years later, depending on what grade you taught, where you see the kid. If you're an elementary teacher, you see them in high school. Or if you're a middle school or high school teacher, you see them at the mall or at a park or someplace, and they say hi. And you go, wow, man, that like gives you some goosebumps. Like, it did matter. And it does matter. And so, again, we talk about there's no judgment in any of the things that we're talking about here today, but sometimes it's hard to keep that long-term perspective, when you've got all the demands and things going on. But making those efforts to try these things and to make those relationships, I think they're just huge investments that make unlimited dividends.
Yeah. You never know. And sometimes you think the things you're doing are maybe not going to have a positive impact on these kids when you're hounding them for stuff or calling their parents, and but it can be surprising. My dad was a truant officer, which is kind of a thankless job, literally chasing kids down and making them go to school. I can't tell you how many times in my youth that we'd be, like at a gas station or a restaurant, and he would have a kid come up to him and say, hey, Mr. Rupert, thanks for chasing me down. Thanks for making me go to school. I didn't think anyone cared if I went. Just the caring and giving them an opportunity to try something different, or putting them in charge of their own learning, like giving them that confidence that you believe they can do this, could be the thing that changes them, that alters their path in their education. You never know. So it's always worth trying something new. If it fails, it fails, but it might not. It might be a success. Even if it's a success for one kid.
That's right.
Could you tell us about your upcoming role with us at SOITA?
Over the past year, I've worked in several school districts doing a variety of different tasks, but my favorite thing is to be doing the instructional tech coaching or integration work with them. So next year, I'm going to be here with SOITA, but a lot of my days are actually going to be spent out in at Yellow Springs, working with their staff and working with their students, and to some extent even working with the community on these ideas that we're talking about how to use technology in an effective way and in an efficient way, and try and make kids the creators instead of the consumers. And we're going to talk about some things called renewable assignments and those kinds of aspects. So there's a lot of things that we're going to be that we do here at SOITA that's going to work for them. And then some of where the rubber meets the road work that I'm going to be doing there with teachers and the students in the building is going to be hopefully helpful to transfer back here to SOITA to kind of give us some ideas on how we can provide the needs that teachers and people have out there.
It's a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I love it.
Could you tell us a little bit about the renewable assignments? Because I think it's a concept really that people are familiar with, but I don't think they've heard it phrased like that.
So, it aligns with a lot of things we do or we talk about doing. So renewable assignments versus disposable. So a disposable assignment is it gets a teacher assigns, and it doesn't matter whether it's digitally or it's analog. That's not the thing with this. A student does it, hopefully, maybe does it, turns it in, teacher grades it, hands it back, kid looks at it, throws it in the garbage. That's it.
We're done.
Lather, rinse.
We did that. We're done.
That's it.
Do not repeat.
or do something different, but it's that there's an end to it. So the idea behind renewable assignments is that it is something that doesn't have to be ongoing forever, but it's something that lives after it's finished. So, renewable, and I'm sure it's a take on recycling. So, I had a bottle of water and I threw it in the bin and it got turned into something else later, or it got used for something else later. So this idea is that there's an assignment that's done that the kids maybe they even get to have some choice in what this is. And it is something that's purposeful after it's finished. So it could be something that's published. It could be a website. It could be an ebook. It can be something that's physically made.
Right.
That's going to be either seen or used by other students, the community, teachers. I mean, it just depends. It doesn't have to be like some grand project that is overwhelming. And it doesn't have to be something that's
Right.
done in every class. Matter of fact, it's really lends itself to that cross-curricular kind of co-teaching thing where, maybe instead of having every class has 10 disposable assignments, maybe the three of us as teachers have time to plan this. That's important again.
Right.
But that it encompasses all the things that we want to learn in our classes, and we have 2 or 3 renewables that are available for kids to do that satisfy the needs of all of our classes. So that's the concept behind it. How new the term is, I don't know, but it's certainly something that has been done before, but it's not very often that we see this. But
because it does take some planning and coordination.
Yeah. And it really is like something that's, we see at a collegiate level. We were, talking about this morning, like when you're working through a master's program or, something of a higher level, that is essentially kind of the concept where you're peer reviewing each other's work and adding to it or using it for reference to build upon further study on what your focus is, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of trickling that down and tweaking it for multiple age groups.
I love that idea that you don't have to arrive at a final answer, that we're providing, like, research doesn't have to be like you said, almost like disposable, like we did it, we're done. This is what the answer is. Research can be built upon. It can be a stepping stone to something else. I love that idea of doing that in the younger grades because that's what they're going to be doing as adults.
Well, and if they're, it doesn't have to be an individual. This can be collaborative. It can be, a couple of students work on this together. There's another real world application is that collaboration that, in school, sometimes we call it cheating, but outside of school, it's collaboration. So just as an example is what if the kids, whether this was just where they develop guided notes or they actually write the textbook with the teacher's facilitation.
Yeah.
And so next year, those kids would use last year's what that was created, but make edits, almost kind of like Wikipedia in a way. That's
like a
renewable.
flex book. Like,
yeah.
CK12 would be a great platform for that. Or you could do it on anything.
You could do it on anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be, laden with.
I love the idea of building on it.
And it doesn't have to be laden with, use Google Slides. I mean, use what you already have that's free. It doesn't have to be
anything.
A paid platform or things like that. So that's just one example. I'm sure that
listeners
will, if they like that idea, will probably have lots of other ones that would be interesting to hear.
And those are the type of projects kids remember.
Mm-hmm.
We had a big project, and I just remember because it was a really big deal when we were in middle school. I think it was for algebra, actually. And we went around and we measured the entire school, and they used our measurements to redo the floor plan of the school and printed it for the fire escapes and tornado drills and everything. And it was this huge collaborative project. It took forever to do. I couldn't tell you a lot of other things we did in that class.
And that's why it's impactful.
Because it was published and meaningful.
Yeah, because I think of that often. Most of the things that I remember from my school years are all somewhat centered around some sort of project. Like, we played the stock market and we had a whole stock market project. And, every week we got the newspaper and we had to track our stocks. And, I remember that. And I remember we had this whole oral storytelling project where we had to sit and interview people. And, those are the things that I remember the most about school because it made the most impact.
Sure.
So
for me, it was the last 6 weeks of the school year in chemistry. Mr. Craig, he was fantastic chemistry teacher, handed us a piece of something. The 6 weeks grade was figure out what that is.
Oh, wow.
Like you test, you do all the tests, all the things that you've used that we've done in class this year. Your job is to identify what that thing is. And then, obviously not just say on a piece of paper, like it's, talc.
It's this.
But you had to tell about what it is that and how you discovered it and what means that you tested this. I don't remember what one I had, but I remember the process.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't a
Well, and that
diamond
was
or anything.
meaningful for you. Yeah, it was meaningful for you. You had to go through a process. And it was also meaningful for the teacher because he really got to see that you had learned all of those things
Bingo.
that you'd been doing throughout the class. Yeah, it was so much better than a paper test for everybody.
All right. I'm going to ask one more just question, and this is kind of totally switching lanes maybe. But I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite educational technology tip, trick, tool, or a piece of advice that you think everybody should know?
So there's a couple tools that I think, and again, I'm going to come at these with more of the creator side of this for students. I think Google Forms is probably one of the most, I think, sometimes underrated of the Google platform on those things in the waffle.
So versatile, right?
So versatile. Oh my gosh. I mean, it doesn't have to be graded things, but it can be. You can create branching types of surveys, assessments, quizzes, whatever you want to call them, that based on an answer, it takes you to a different place. I think about kids using this on the other hand, could create those choose your own adventure kind of books. Where if you remember those, where you get to a question, and if you answer A, it's going to take you to this section. B, it's going to take you to that section. Those can be teacher created, or those can be obviously student created, and I think both of those are certainly ways that you can use as an instructional tool and also as an assessment tool. I think Edpuzzle is pretty cool also. And again, whether it's the teacher that finds the video or makes the video and embeds the questions, or if it's where you have students go find and let them embed the questions that are involved with the video, and I think you get to see a lot of what they found was important in the content or in what you're learning about. So those would be the two. As far as tips, we talked about this earlier, but start small with doing the kinds of things we've talked about today. Don't empty the file cabinet and start all over again. Please don't do anything like that. If you've got a peer, whether it's down the hall or, across the district or somewhere else, connect with people who are trying to do the things that you're doing. I think Twitter is a really good resource for finding ideas, and certainly we can put in some follows if people are interested in that. And again, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what we're here for. That's what if your district already has instructional tech coaches or curriculum coaches or whatever their title happens to be, use those folks. That's what they're there for.
It's okay to start small. It's okay to use the resources you have. And if you start out just by replicating content and moving it online, that's a great place to start, as a stepping stone to these bigger and grander ideas. But the goal is always to keep moving, keep growing, building on the content and the knowledge until you're to the point where you're able to kind of let go of the reins and let the students take control of their learning, and let them do these meaningful projects with real world application. It's the goal. It's not the starting point. It's kind of the goal that we're working towards. Right.
Yeah. And I think those are the big takeaways for today. Thank you, Matt, for joining us today. And we hope we'll have you back. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion today. If you like our podcast, please don't forget to subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released.
For more information about our podcast and to access links and resources referenced in this episode, check us out at fortheloveofedtech.org.